Welcome to New York 4 to 7, presented by Verizon. I'm your host, Niki Lattarulo. Today, we are joined by Mets beat writer for MLB.com, Anthony DiComo. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. Let's see how many topics we will cover today. 5 topics for the 5 train. Our first topic is a backlog in the Mets infield. Anthony, you recently wrote an article on MLB.com going more into detail on the Mets' current infield situation. First of all, let's start with Mark Vientos. What have you been hearing about his health and when he could possibly be going into a rehab assignment?
Yeah, he's definitely moving a lot faster than I think people thought when they saw him injure his hamstring there in Los Angeles. It was quite the fall he took. It didn't look great, but it was a grade 1 hamstring strain, which is the least severe variety. So he's actually going to start a rehab assignment on Tuesday. I don't believe he will need that long of an assignment because he's only missed 2 weeks up to this point. So yeah, you should be able to see Mark Vientos rejoin the Mets sooner rather than later. I can't put an exact date on it, but a hunch, a guess would be by the time the Mets get off this road trip and return home to Citi Field next week, Mark Vientos is probably going to be ready to go around that point.
The perks of being a young, healthy guy, quickly bouncing back from these injuries. Let's talk about another young guy, Brett Baty, also dealing with some sort of injury, was removed Sunday's game with right groin tightness. What are you hearing on that front? Anything to be super concerned about, Anthony?
It doesn't sound major, and I know people say, well, nothing sounds major until it is. But one thing Brett Baty said that interested me was that he has dealt with this exact thing in the past, and 24, 48 hours of just letting it calm down have been enough for him to get back on the field. So that's kind of the assumption here is that given today's off day, by the time the Mets open up that series in Atlanta, Brett Baty should be ready to go, no worse for wear. If something happens in the interim, the Mets will adjust, but it doesn't look like this is a major thing for Baty.
Yeah, that's great news. So the infield as a whole, there's a lot of guys now. They got Ronnie Mauricio, they have Acuna, when Vientos is back, and then of course Brett Baty. Where do you see the team adjusting its roster with that group of guys?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because really there's 4 guys counting Vientos. You've got Brett Baty there, you've got Ronnie Mauricio now, you've got Luis Angel Acuna, who has carved out a real role as a late game defensive replacement, pinch runner, that sort of thing. So he's bringing value as well. So when Vientos comes back, the obvious and easy move would be just to option Jared Young, who's barely playing, to the minor leagues. The question is there going to be enough playing time to go around? I mean, Jeff McNeil's been playing great. So if he's starting most days at second base, that really just leaves third base and DH for some combination of Baty, Vientos, Mauricio, and then you still want to work in Acuna from time to time. Um, could the Mets work that out? Yes. Is that what's best for players' development, like Ronnie Mauricio, who could probably stand to use a few more at-bats in the minors as opposed to playing once or twice a week in the majors? That's the question that Carlos Mendoza is going to have to answer, that David Stearns is going to have to answer. And I'm not sure what the answer is, Niki, because it's not an easy situation. These guys all deserve to be in the majors in that they've given the Mets some flashes of some really interesting potential here. But also, again, if someone like Ronnie Mauricio is only playing 1 or 2 games a week, could he be better served in the minors? That's the decision really that the Mets are going to have to make.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting because even a guy like Mark Vientos, he could benefit from more reps at third base. Just being out there could help any of these guys. So it's kind of a good problem to have that they have a lot of guys, but also you want 1 or 2 guys that are just doing amazing offensively and defensively where you're not worried about switching people out. Let's talk about something that kind of shocked the baseball world. Rafi Devers was moved after sweeping the AL East leading Yankees Sunday. The Red Sox superstar was dealt to the San Francisco Giants. Anthony, any noise about the Red Sox continuing to sell? Because they looked pretty good against the Yankees this weekend.
Yeah, and I think you kind of have to look at this Rafi Devers move in a vacuum. This is not a team that, at least not right now, that's selling off its pieces. This is a team that has had a very public falling out with this player over the span of quite a long time now. Clearly saw an opportunity to move him to get out from under a $300 million plus contract. And so they took it. And you could certainly argue with whether that was the right move for the Red Sox. But regardless, they got 2 major league starting pitchers back in return, in addition to some prospects. They've won 5 games in a row. They're still very much in the mix, above 500 in the AL East. And the AL as a whole is not nearly as much of a gauntlet as the National League is looking like on paper. So For all those reasons, if I'm the Red Sox, I'm not saying I'm selling off my veterans. I'm saying, what do I need to do now without Rafi Devers to continue to compete? I think that's where their heads are at. So things could certainly change in the 6 weeks between now and the trade deadline. But as of right now, no, I think the Red Sox are very much looking like a team that wants to try to make the playoffs in spite of this pretty seismic trade that it just made.
I mean, listen, the Yankees are a really good team, but it is questionable if you're a Yankee fan to see them only win one game against the Red Sox this season. So we'll see what the Red Sox can do. Do you think in any world the Mets go after Jarren Duran?
Doesn't feel like a great fit to me. A, for all the reasons I just mentioned, I don't see the Red Sox really selling at this juncture. B, the Mets, I just don't see them putting all their chips in the middle of the table for a hitter, and especially for a hitter that's maybe not even a perfect defensive fit. Jarren Duran has plenty of experience at center field, but if you're going to add for the Mets, I think you would want someone who has played there a little more recently. Jarren Duran not really playing there this season. So you put that all together. It's hard for me to see the Mets at this deadline pushing their chips in the middle for anything huge, huge, given how well the roster has been constructed up to this point. But if they did, I think they'd probably be looking more on the starting pitching side of things versus a position player. They're pretty well set with that core of Lindor, Alonso, Soto, and everyone else up and down that lineup.
You mentioned starting pitching. Let's go to our third topic, which is none other than the unicorn, Shohei Ohtani. He returned to the mound last night against the Padres, the first time since 2023. I feel like that came up so quick. I saw that headline. I was like, wow, Ohtani back already. Would you have liked to see the Mets go against him at least once in the regular season? Because we're probably going to see those two face off in the postseason. Fingers
Yeah,
crossed.
it does seem inevitable, right, that the Mets and the Dodgers are going to square off in October. I don't know how much that matters, especially now. With Ohtani just starting to take the mound, he's going to be operating more as an opener, pitching an inning, maybe two at the start of games, while he gets his sea legs under him and starts to stretch out as a starting pitcher once more. It's June. The Mets saw the Dodgers for the last time this season here in early June. So it's going to be 4 months before the playoffs hit, before the Mets see them again. And I'm not sure how much relevance there is to seeing a starting pitcher with that much of a gap in between. It's going to be a challenge. Look, if the Mets do wind up facing off with the Dodgers in the postseason, we saw last year in that 7-game NLCS how a team like the Dodgers can just wear you down. And I think looking at that roster out in Los Angeles, the hope of teams around the league is that they're going to struggle only because that rotation of Ohtani, Glasnow, Blake Snell, all these guys that looked so formidable on paper, well, those guys weren't healthy. But if they start to get healthy now, then it's a much different looking Dodger team. Certainly, that's what the Dodgers are hoping for by the time they get to October, and certainly the Mets are maybe kind of quietly rooting against that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Dodgers are a scary team, healthy or unhealthy, which says a lot about the depth they have. Do you think with Ohtani's return to the mound, it affects any other area of his game, or you think he continues to rake and also continues to be on the mound?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Dodgers would be doing this if they didn't think Ohtani could handle it. I don't think the Dodgers would have given Shohei Ohtani a $500 million contract if they didn't think he could handle it. That's the allure, that's the draw of a player like Shohei Ohtani. So look, he's had some injuries pop up in his career. Would they have popped up, had he not been a two-way player? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly, obviously, a UCL reconstruction would not have most likely. But the bottom line is this. Hitting and pitching is what makes Shohei Ohtani special. If I had him on my team, I would absolutely want him to do both because he's so talented at both. So I totally understand why the Dodgers are doing this. I would be doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, like he's a good hitter, but then you just basically have Aaron Judge on your team. But imagine Aaron Judge could pitch. It would make his lore even more mind-blowing. All right, let's move into topic number 4, 7 games with the Braves in the next 10 days. Usually that sounds a little more scary than it is, considering the Braves aren't their true selves as of right now. The Mets head to Atlanta for the first time this season, first time since Francisco Lindor's playoff clinching home run in Game 161 last year. New York has gotten off to a fast start while the Braves not so much. Anthony, give us a preview of what you're looking to see in this series.
Yeah, I really liked what Brandon Nimmo said on Sunday night, which was, I don't care what Atlanta's record is. They're a good team. They've got good players over there. And you mentioned, Niki, that they're not their best selves right now, the Braves. And that's true if you look at their record. But if you look at what's been going on with their team, they're definitely in better shape than they have been. Ronald Acuna is back. He's playing at beyond an MVP caliber level. I mean, really, he's been one of the best, if not the best players in baseball since his return. And then all of a sudden, you look at how the Braves line up their rotation for this week against the Mets, and it's Schwellenbach, Sale, and Spencer Strider. So those are three of the best starting pitchers in the league coming at you right at a time when the Mets' own rotation is starting to see some cracks really for the first time this season. So it actually sets up really well on paper for the Braves this week. But I do like that the Mets have maybe that little bit of a mental edge that comes from winning 161 last year, clinching the playoffs in Atlanta, exorcising those demons. I mean, these are all just sort of ambiguous storylines, and they're not necessarily real facts because the Braves could easily go in and sweep the Mets this week. But I think if you're the Mets and it's largely the same team that was so good last year, you have to look at it, and it's just a little bit of a different feel when you know that you've gone in there and done that, as opposed to having to look back on those decades of failures in Atlanta and being like, gee, I don't know if this is real or not. This is definitely a Mets team that can compete with the Braves, even at full strength, which they're certainly getting to.
I think when we look at the Braves this year, everyone's like not counting them out, but you see how many games they are back in the standings and this and that. But we remember the Mets last year where I think, what was it, 12 games under 500 at one point, and everyone was just writing them off, and they come out of nowhere with Grimace and OMG and the whole thing, and they come back. Do you think the Braves have a little OMG in them that they could actually make a playoff push this year?
I mean, I think they have the talent to do it, and they definitely have some concerns. The rotation looks great, but the depth beyond that, they can ill afford any more injuries to that group. But when you talk about like the OMG Mets, it's got to be something a little more than talent. You need to A, get a little bit of luck on your side. B, you need to sort of be playing together as a unit. The margin for error just becomes very small, and that's the Braves' problem right now. They're all but out of contention for the NL East title as we sit here in mid-June. I mean, that's probably going to be a race between the Mets and the Phillies. And while I wouldn't ever totally count them out, if you're the Braves, you're probably looking at trying to get a wild card. And I think that's much more in play for them. I think that's a reasonable goal for them. And then, if you're the other teams in the National League, you say, gee, I really wouldn't want to play this team if they manage to sneak into the playoffs and get hot. So for the Mets this week and the 7 games they're going to play coming up against the Braves are a great opportunity for them, not just to continue proving that this is their division to lose, but
Mhm.
to kind of step down a little bit on the Braves and say, no, 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 no. Whatever comeback you think you have in you, we're going to stop it right here, right now, and maybe take them out of contention to the extent that they question whether they can do it. Maybe that changes their trade deadline strategy. There's all sorts of ways in which this could go, but it's a great opportunity for the Mets to kind of reverse the roles a little bit here and be like, no, no, Atlanta, this is our division now. You're not going to come back up.
Yeah, especially with how stacked the NL is, you don't want to be in a position where you have to win the wild card because we know there are a lot of teams for those spots. If you're in the AL, a little bit of a different story. So you mentioned the Phillies. That is our final topic, topic number 5. 3 games with the Phillies in the next 10 days. Anthony, while the Mets were swept this past weekend, the Phillies did the opposite. They swept the Blue Jays, cutting into New York's NL East lead. The Mets face the Phillies this weekend between their 2 series with the Braves. How important is this series for the Mets against a Braves team that's chipping away at their lead?
Yeah, I think look, all these divisional games are important, especially against the Braves and the Phillies, which are the 2 teams, as we've discussed, who you expect to be there at the end. And I think it's a similar circumstance in which the Mets have handled the Phillies so well over the last year, obviously in the NLDS last year. But really, they have not been overpowered by what's still a very good Phillies team. And you don't want to take that for granted if you're the Mets because you still have to show up, you still have to play. It's still a very talented team. It's still a really raucous atmosphere every time you go in there in Philadelphia in Citizens Bank Park. So, again, this is another opportunity for the Mets to reestablish themselves and reaffirm themselves as the clear favorite in the NL East. Because if they go through this stretch of 10 games against the Braves and Phillies and go 3-7, 4-6, then all of a sudden the division looks wide open. But if they do the opposite and they go 7-3 in these games, then all of a sudden you're looking at the second half of the season, not necessarily as a victory lap, but the Mets are going to be prohibitive favorites coming down the stretch, going into the trade deadline, all that stuff. That's where you want to be.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that it's mid-June, it's still pretty early. We're still in the first half of the season. This is a great opportunity for the Mets really to affirm themselves at the top of that division and make it so that the Phillies and the Braves both are looking more towards the wild card than they are at catching the Mets.
Yeah, the Mets lead in the NL East could be pretty big if they do what they need to do these next couple of series. Anthony, is there anyone specific in these next series that you want to see really step up, that you're like waiting for them to have their big breakout moment, but they could be a difference maker?
I mean, it seems like this question is just engineered for the Juan Soto answer because he's still look, he had a good couple of weeks. He slowed down a little bit on the homestand. But we're still waiting for that signature series, that signature week where he just goes absolutely nuts and puts the Mets on his back. And I still have no doubt that it will come. And I still have no doubt that his numbers are going to be great at the end of the year. They're already pretty solid, especially compared to where they were, at the end of May. But I feel like it has to be coming soon. And what a time for it to be if Juan Soto does wind up really breaking out in Atlanta and Philadelphia. That would be a place where the Mets, especially again with the rotation starting to struggle a little bit, the Mets would very much take a little bit of slug from their $765 million player.
Yeah, it looks like he's just waiting for the big series. I think against the Phillies would be even more. I mean, the Braves, obviously, it always means a little more, but I feel like if he can go off against the Phillies, it would really propel Mets fans to thinking this could possibly really be their year. Well, Anthony, is there anything else you want to add about these big series?
I just enjoy covering them. I'm flying
Yeah.
down to Atlanta tomorrow. It's always fun to go in there and watch these crazy games because they do tend to be wild down there. And same thing with Philly, one of my favorite ballparks to go and just cover a game. There's always great atmosphere. This is the fun stuff. This is the good stuff. We've done a lot of Rockies, White Sox, games of that nature in recent weeks. So to go and cover these games that really could have huge implications for what ultimately happens this season, this is fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to all the coverage and all the fun, hopefully exciting games in those two big cities. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's it for us on New York 4 to 7, presented by Verizon. For Anthony DiComo, I'm Niki Lattarulo. Thank you for watching. We will see you back here next time.